Will we see more liquidations of businesses in New Zealand in 2026? Now, I'm sure most of you are obviously going to answer yes, and we are with you. Of course, we're going to see more liquidations. The question becomes how many more? Now, 2025 was a fairly large year for liquidations in business in New Zealand, and I'll give you some stats from Waterstone on that very, very soon. But firstly, anecdotally, a lot of people will be reading the media and seeing people come back into, let's say, green shoots. Half of the articles in 2026, whereas people will still be reading about liquidations and how maybe the economy is not turning fast enough for some of these businesses. Now, one of the first things we have to remember, there's always a lag into an economy and also human decision making and also people's hands being forced. Now, people, as an example, can get into IRD debt and then they can go on an installment arrangement and probably keep the IRD at bay for some time. But eventually, if they miss that installment arrangement or just accept that there's not enough margin in what they are doing in order to clear the historic taxes and get on top of them, plus stay current with the current taxes, they have to eventually decide or accept that they may need to liquidate. So obviously that's normally a last resort for businesses. And by the time they get to that, or the IRD get them to that point, there has been an incredible lag from when they first become unprofitable or unable to meet their obligations when they were due. So Adrian Orr from the Reserve Bank actually mentioned maybe January 2024 that you sort of have a 5-year debt lag between the bottom of the economic activity and the bad debt washing out of a system. So expect to see more liquidations in 2026 and 2027. And don't just expect that, okay, because the economy could be getting better in the eyes of some people, that things will just improve and we'll never see liquidations. That's just simply not how it works. Now, as always, you have different industries and you have different parts of a country that all then perform differently economically. So hospo and retail and construction would be very different to service-based businesses in the service sector, and accounting practice might be very different to an architectural firm, for instance. So, it can be very blanket when you read these articles about liquidations as a whole and business as a whole, because business has so many different pockets. Now, you would hate to be a large construction firm trying to find a large volume of work compared to a small business in the construction space that need to feed 2 or 3 people, because the more agile and smaller business can probably find enough stuff to keep them busy or avoid running up large debts as they try and get through a slowdown in an economy where it could be harder for a larger business to do that, and the smaller business, you could argue, could take action faster. So, of course, these things, interesting to read about and talk about, but everybody's business is different, and we're seeing different results in different sectors and different parts of the economy. Auckland's still very tough. It seems like the further south you go, there's a lot more optimism, and things seem to be moving as well in all sorts of different areas. But I was reading through some of the Waterstone data. You could probably sign up to their newsletter if you are interested in this stuff. Dig out Waterstone Law and you'll find their newsletter. They said in 2025, total liquidations were 2,867. That's a 13.5% increase from 2024. Now, another article that I read on the 2024 liquidations said that they were a third higher than 2023. So these have been creeping up. But Waterstone say this in 2025 was making it the 4th highest annual number since 2001. Although continuing the upwards trend that started in 2022, the increase is significantly smaller than the 37% jump seen from 2023 to 2024. Oh, they've backed it up as well. So I read 2 different articles, but these guys are basically saying at Waterstone that liquidations increased by 37% from 2023 to 2024. So maybe they've slowed down from that growth. But what may be driving some of those in that 37% increase? The IRD getting a bit more heavy-handed, and they've got to chase some of this unpaid debt, GST, PAYE, or stop people trading to go further into debt. And I think we've seen loosely unpaid debts go from around $4 billion up to 10. Now that includes income tax for individuals and the like, but GST and PAYE arrears have been growing, and you've probably been reading about that a lot in the media, and I think a lot of people have learnt what liquidations over this last 2 years. Now, Waterstone go on to say, interestingly, December 2025 had 286 liquidations, which is the second highest December figure on record since 2001, surpassed only by December 2008. And we all sort of know what was happening around 2007, 2008, don't we? Which had 351 liquidations. So a lot of liquidations in December. And that is, I guess, what we should expect as we get to really that crunch point of an economy. I think there was a lot of people that thought 2025 would just be better, but I'll go through some of the things that are probably holding back the economy in a second. But you can't just hope an economy will get better or that your unpaid tax or your unpaid creditors will go away. Normally you have to do something about it, and that includes making enough profit to be able to pay them back. Now, one of the reasons I think people have struggled to do this is that from what we see across a broad range of SMEs is that a lot of business owners simply don't understand their numbers well enough, and they haven't understood the pressure on the margins in their business. So if we give you a simple example, it could be somebody running a store and their costs are going up. Now, because their costs are going up, if they're not keeping an eye on what they're selling for, then they are not protecting their margin to then have enough margin left over to repay their debts, so any arrears, or even pay back the finance company for the vehicle that's on finance, or whatever loan that they may have. And obviously then their overheads have been increasing too. If you think of the likes of water, internet, power, wages, of course, as well, and you could argue they're a cost input or an overhead. That's accounting semantics. Rent, for instance, so all those costs are going up. Travel around the country, entertainment, just running the business and running life has got more expensive too. So we've tried to keep our drawings and our personal wages in line with the cost increases in our personal life, but we've also got cost increases in our business life as well. So it's meaning there's a lot of squeeze in the business. So we got our sales, and then the sales are slowing down, but our costs are going up, our overheads are going up, and our personal costs are going up. So there's a lot of squeeze for these businesses, and simply not enough margin in here to allow them to get back on top of the issues that they've faced over the prior 5 years, or whenever it is that they've run into these economic troubles or these debt troubles that they have. So if you're not clear on that, that's probably when you're going to seek advice, and perhaps liquidation practitioner is going to say, hey, maybe we need to explore liquidating or restructuring. And from talking to another firm, I think they can see they've got a big pipeline of work to come. So that kind of answers the question of the video. Will we see more liquidations? From what they're telling us, yes, there's going to be a lot of very busy practitioners in that space, because there's just such a lag, accepting that that's a situation they're in, or being their hand forced to do it, but also just the debt lag to wash through, as Adrian Orr taught us about. So in October 2025, I read that was the biggest year in a decade of liquidations as well. So 2025 was obviously a very big year for it. Now, I think as well what we've seen is that people's two other things, sales are decreasing for some of these businesses whereby people have choice. Now, if we use a simple example, Temu, for instance, people are spending at Temu. Now, some people tell us that Kiwi people should not be buying from Temu because they use questionable employment tactics, let's say, or labour tactics to keep the prices down. I do not know enough about Temu. I've never used it, never been on there, so I don't know if that's hearsay. But then also, I saw an article last year where people were saying, well, I'm choosing Temu because it's cheaper than the New Zealand option, and then the businesses in New Zealand are saying, well, that's eating into us being able to provide for you and have a business, and people are saying, well, I don't care. And it's just ruthless out there, isn't it? And these people are saying, well, basically, I can get it cheaper, so why would I pay you for it? So people will probably find the convenience for themselves and the cheapest price, and that's going to mean that Kiwi retailers are going to miss out if people can go and get this stuff online. So I think we're seeing some of those sellers of that stuff try and compete with a big business like Temu. Now, I think we're watching $1 billion rush out of the country to use the likes of Temu. Now, if you put that on scale with different forms of options that people have, well, again, making it hard for New Zealanders to compete when they've got to pay for increased wages, increased overheads, have the presence, do Facebook marketing ads, compete with the brand, and Temu becomes a household name, but the SME people have never heard of. So that becomes tricky as well. And then the next thing as well is that wage growth isn't keeping up with inflation. So as much as the politicians and the economists say, oh, hey, inflation's come down, that's really great, you don't want your purchasing power to be eroded at 3% compounded every year. You're going to end up in a world of hurt, and that's what we've faced. For a lot of us, we've seen increasing food prices of 40 to 50% over the last 5 years, and it's very noticeable now when we go and we try and purchase food and we compare it to what it used to cost. Now, have our wages kept up with that? Well, for a lot of people, no, simply no. So they're having to make these decisions like, do you want to shop at Temu versus shopping locally? Okay, I think I will do Temu, or I will use this overseas provider that's cheaper because I've got to find where I can stretch my budget a little bit further. So still some heavy headwinds for the New Zealand economy. And if you're not providing value and articulating that and selling things that people really want, then it could be another very tricky year in business for those types types of businesses. So the warning here before we drag this on too long is that we see a better year coming for the world, especially action takers, and people having a bit more money in their pocket that they're willing to spend, especially baby boomers, people that have had term deposits. But for a lot of households, their budgets will still be tight if they can't get in control of inflation, which we're not seeing much of a validation that the the politicians, can, or whoever's supposed to be in control of it. So just expect more inflation and sticky inflation that's going to eat into people's ability to be able to have more money to spend, and that's going to cause issues for households. So that then flows on to the business. So you have to really ensure two things: that you are really dialed in with your offer if you are a business owner, and you are pushing to sell whatever it is that you're selling. And then secondly, if you are providing credit for people, then you need to be careful who you're providing credit for, because people may not be able to pay you. And that could then turn your business into a risk where you then can't go and pay your creditors, your suppliers, or even the loans that you have as well. So still be on your toes out there, and we will keep an eye on how liquidations are progressing in 2026.